Hello, everybody. Scott Mann here, founder and director of the Stability Institute, and it's an honor to be talking to you today. I'm sorry that I'm unable to be there. Usually, Jim Green and myself tag team this event, and unfortunately, this time around, both Jim and I have been unable to come and present to you guys. But we felt like it was important enough to talk to you about this subject, so working with Paul and a few of the other ADAP team members, we've decided to go ahead and record this particular presentation, and then I'll pause at certain points in it to allow Paul and the other agricultural experts to weigh in with their thoughts and perspective. But the title of today's presentation is VSO, or Village Stability Operations and Agriculture. And we've been doing this class for several months now, and we really try to focus it in on the challenges and opportunities that are present in the rural areas of Afghanistan, so that you have a better idea of what's really going on and what the agricultural opportunities are out there that you can use to improve stability in these areas. What I'd like to do first is go over what the session today is going to look like. I've already talked about the purpose. Really, again, it's just to identify challenges and opportunities related to bottom-up stability and specifically agriculture within that. And I'm gonna go next into a little bit about where we are today. I think it's very important to understand some of the Afghan realities that we face. I'm not going to go real deep on this, but I want to make sure that you at least have a macro level understanding of some of the real challenges that are out there. Also, I want to get into the phases of village stability operations. There are several phases that we use to stabilize rural areas in this undergoverned country called Afghanistan. So I want to talk about those, and in each phase, we're going to dive in a little bit on some of the agricultural opportunities that exist there. And so this is the real meat of it, shape through, expand, and transition. And then we'll hit a few key takeaways and then go into a discussion. So let's get right into it. The first thing I want to do to kind of set the stage here is a little bit of framing, is to talk a little bit about Afghan history. First of all, you should know that Afghanistan's history is replete with a number of social mobilizations or uprisings. These have occurred from the time that Afghanistan has been founded in the 1700s and even before. And social mobilization, grassroots movements of the people, have occurred many, many times, often resulting in insurgencies and sometimes coups and overthrows of the monarchy or the sitting government. Now, most of those social mobilizations came from the rural areas. This is also very important to know, as well as the rural Pashtun areas, because a lot of the areas where this insurgency is emanating from now are rural, and most of them are Pashtun. And so this is very much in keeping with social mobilizations throughout history. But what I want you to take away is that Afghanistan has a long, storied history of social mobilizations from the bottom up that came from rural Pashtun areas. There has always been a struggle between the center and the periphery, or as Thomas Barfield refers, the top and the bottom. This really represents the gap between the formal government and the central government and those rural outlying areas that frankly are beyond the reach of the government. And we'll talk more about that in a minute, but just know that there's always been a struggle there. And so if you look at the third bullet, because that gap is in place, really most of the efforts that have been undertaken to create stability in Afghanistan from the top down have not gone well. They have failed. And not only have they failed, they've normally triggered rural rebellions, like I talked about, those social mobilizations that were bottom up and that came from the rural areas. A few examples in history were Amanullah Khan in the early 1900s when he tried to invoke progressive reform to include women's rights. And then, of course, the communist era, where massive land reform was undertaken, and many of the problems that you guys will encounter in the rural areas related to land management and water rights are tied back to this progressive reform that the communists tried to invoke by unseating many of the rural elders from their landed holdings. And the final bullet there is that stability in Afghanistan. When you really step back and ask yourself, hey, what has worked in this country? What did relative stability look like in Afghanistan? You realize that it really came from the bottom up and the top down. Not many people realize this, but Afghanistan has a history of relative stability. And you know what? It's not that long ago that it was stable. From the 1920s to the 1970s, a period known as the Mujahideen dynasty, where the monarchs sat on the throne, they were actually able to stabilize Afghanistan, relatively speaking. And what they did was that the central government controlled what they could in the urban areas. That's your top-down part with, security, legitimacy, governance in those urban areas. But the bottom-up efforts also were necessary, and this was generally in the Pashtun areas where bottom-up informal systems related to security, governance, and development were handled at a very local level. And there was an understanding that you had to have both in order to have relative stability in the country. So what happened? Well, I will tell you, when the Soviets invaded, that began 30 plus years of determined attacks against that balance, that very precarious balance that I just showed you. What this slide here depicts is where we are today. So you see there's a gap reading left to right where the old men sitting around in a circle there. That's called a jirga or a shura. That's your informal governance. And then you see the gap there, and then to the right you see some of the parliamentarians sitting there. That's your formal governance structure. So that gap has always been there, and that's nothing new. And then if you look below the black line in the center there, you see another view of an Afghan government building, and then you see the gap depicted with the village. Again, the same thing, but now what has happened is the local systems that normally handled all of those bottom-up affairs, whether it was conflict resolution or just food security of agriculture, tribal relations, all of those things were managed daily at a local informal level. Well, those systems, starting with the Soviet occupation through the ethnic civil war, the Taliban rule, and even our period there, has resulted in severely damaged informal systems, especially in the rural Pashtun areas. This has largely affected agriculture as well. So many of the sources of instability that have destabilized the country of Afghanistan at a local level that then transcends to a national level are related to these damaged informal systems. So not only do you have a gap between top and bottom, but the normal historical ability to handle one's own affairs at a local informal level have been damaged. And a large chunk of that is agriculture. And the absence of this agricultural capacity has enabled the insurgents and the Islamists to exploit and supplant many of these informal systems. So let's get into what that really set the tone for village stability operations. In 2009, Special Forces and Special Operations started asking ourselves, why isn't it working, what we're doing over there? And what we realized was that this gap between the top and the bottom that you're looking at and this degradation of local systems was simply too much for us to handle from a top-down fashion where we were driving to work from fire bases and combat outposts. We needed to get back to our roots, move into these local communities, work from the bottom up to address the damaged informal systems that you see there at the bottom, and then work back towards the central government. So that's VSO, that's Village Stability Operations. And now let's look at how agriculture can actually influence and inform that. Okay, so here's the shape phase. Village Stability Operations, you see the blue box that says JAROA, that stands for Government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. And then that arrow that's trending down represents the top-down approach. And that's been the singular coin approach for the last 10 plus years, and it really has not worked. The village red box that you see there represents the bottom-up approach that we've been doing really since 2009 in the form of village stability operations and Afghan local police. And that upward trending arrow represents the bottom-up applications that are done to complement the top-down approach. It's not one or the other. Remember, relative stability in Afghanistan has been maintained through a top-down and bottom-up approach. So that's what this particular diagram depicts. And notice how the blue line and the red line come together at the district center. This is where we try to bring together the top-down, bottom-up efforts. The district center is normally where this manifests. It's pretty much the limit of advance of the formal government, and it's usually where the village elders go to be heard. So those two arrows coming together, top-down, bottom-up, at the district center, and then moving off to the right into a balanced approach. That's what we're really after when we talk about relative stability in Afghanistan. So in the shape phase, I will tell you the big thing that we're trying to do is select the right areas to work from the bottom up, where our guys are going to move into those villages and work among the Afghan population. The next thing we have to do is reduce intimidation. Most of these areas are very heavily intimidated, and most of the communities are unwilling to work with us until we actually reduce the level of overt intimidation to an acceptable point that they can work with us without retribution. Also, gaining trust is a really big deal, and many of these communities, entire communities, have PTSD. They've seen 3 decades of warfare, and they're very distrustful, especially as they think about us leaving the country. So we have to work very hard using our multiple special forces, special operations, interpersonal skills to gain trust with them. And I will tell you, your role and your knowledge of agriculture can play a huge part in that, and we'll talk more about that later. Also working with Afghan National Army Special Forces, Afghan National Army Security Forces. This is another way to gain legitimacy and gain trust. But gaining trust in the beginning is very important. One of the ways we do that is through the informal governance mechanism known as the Shura. Also, these elders that you see sitting around the wall here at the district center, they're also the guys who are going to have most of the knowledge on agriculture, institutional farming knowledge. So the Shura, the informal council of elders, the informal governance body, is going to continue to play a role as we work bottom up throughout village stability operations. And then you see here this blue star really represents the decisive point of village stability operations. When people ask me, hey, what's different about VSO than other thing we've done in Afghanistan, I will say it's because we're living and working among the Afghan people. 3 things. We're able to help protect them day and night. We're able to responsibly oversee what we start, and the folks we're living and working around really view us as guests in their community. And those are 3 very powerful, important criteria that change the paradigm in how we're doing business. So that's the shape phase. That's working to get into the community and live and work among the Afghan people. Now let's take a look at agriculture. I will tell you, if you think that all Afghans are just natural-born farmers, that's not necessarily a foregone conclusion. The bottom line is, in many areas of Afghanistan, farming is a bit of a forgotten skill. Most of these folks live their life in refugee camps. Up to 7 million Afghans, mostly rural Afghans, were displaced. And so in an oral history tradition, they've lost their ability to farm because they spent a large chunk of their life in the refugee camps of Pakistan and just recently moved back once we liberated the country from the Taliban. You'll see things where they're killing earthworms and they're killing wasps in apricot areas. So don't assume that just because these folks live in rural areas that they're great farmers, because in many ways they've lost the ability to farm, and your knowledge on agriculture could actually be very useful. There are good Afghan farmers. There really are. As you can see in this picture here, there are many Afghan farmers who know what they're doing, and those are the folks, those are the local resiliencies that you want to find in the area and really amplify what they're doing and broker that knowledge across other areas where maybe it's not going so well. And I'll pause here for Paul and the rest of the ADAP team to make any comments. Okay, the next area that is, that I want to talk about, it gets back to what I was saying earlier, is that not all of the Afghan folks living in the rural areas are great farmers, as you can see by this photo here. There are a lot of folks who simply lack these skills, and your ability to come in with bottom-up interventions. Remember, now we're talking about working into the village. So as you're trying to work your way into a local community, whether you're formally doing VSO or not, agriculture is a great point of entry and a common language that I have always found to work very well no matter where you go, whether you're working in a Tajik area in the north or a Pashtun area in the south or east. The more you understand agriculture, the more you can come down on their level and relate to their concerns and issues the more credibility and legitimacy you will have in working your way in with that local population. So I really want to emphasize agriculture as a point of entry and a common language when dealing with rural Afghans and relative stability. And I'll pause here for the ADAP team to make any comments on some of the challenges that Afghan farmers have in rural Afghanistan. Okay, now we're into the hold phase. We've moved into the village. We're living among the Afghan people, and now we're going to start working truly from the bottom up to stabilize the community. And what's important about this is that in most rural areas, the communities are very distrustful of the government, and until they're able to stabilize their own villages, until they have food security that at least goes for the full year, until they're able to resolve their own conflicts, they're going to be very distrustful of their government, and they're not going to necessarily embrace government programs and government representation. So a lot of the activities that special operations will be doing in your areas, if they're doing VSO there, once they move into the village, are to stabilize from the bottom up. So let's take a look at that. One thing they're going to be doing is working to establish an Afghan local police force. This is sanctioned by the Ministry of Interior. They're authorized 300 Afghan local police at each district in Afghanistan where they've been validated and vetted. They get paid about 60% of what Afghan national police get paid, and they are combat advised by special operations forces. And this is really a local solution to local security issues. So that's along the security lines what's being done from the bottom up. Now I want to talk about economic development, which is largely agriculture from the bottom up. What we have found is that in these rural communities, interventions that are large scale, programmatic, sweeping changes generally don't go well in these rural areas. In fact, they're just not that well received, and most of them are not enduring. What we have found to be successful are bottom-up initiatives also tied to agriculture that are supported by the local shura or governance council, that are supported by the people, that address their sources of instability and not something we think they should have. Usually cost less than $5,000 and often much less than that, and really involve knowledge brokering, passing knowledge on agriculture that can increase yield, for example. And we'll get into this more in a minute. The other line of operation that is really effective during the bottom-up hold phase is informal governance. We're going to work very closely to identify and hopefully empower or re-empower local elders, local resilient actors to stand up for their own communities and govern in a way that they've historically done and that is locally appropriate. It may not be necessarily what we view as ideal in our Western sense, but that's not what they're looking for. What they're looking for is a resilient, pragmatic way of governance that they understand. And in many cases, that's their elder system or other local resiliencies, even youth organizations. But this is closely tied to agriculture. Don't think that agriculture and informal governance are separate. They're not. Until you can work closely with the informal governance mechanism of your community, the odds of any meaningful agricultural interventions are going to be very thin. The odds of that happening are very slim. But if we do these things right, what we end up getting is a bubble around our community that really stabilizes it. Also, one other thing I just want to point out during the hold phase is in your area there's a Civil Military Operations Center known as a CMAC. And with them, they have outreach folks working at the district level known as DATS, District Augmentation Teams, as you see in the top center here, and PATS, Provincial Augmentation Teams, who are often working at the PRTs. What these guys represent is your connection into the village areas where the special ops guys are operating. So a good point of entry if you're an ADT or if you're anyone working agriculture or civil affairs and you want to connect to what the guys are doing with Afghan local police and local things, work through your regional civil military operations center. They're normally at the same special ops headquarters, what they call a SOTF, in each region. And they're doing parallel capacity building with the district governor, with the provincial governor, with the Ministry of Agriculture, Irrigation, and Livestock. They're a catalyst that's looking to connect top down to bottom up, and they're a great point of entry for you. And that's the whole phase. So let's take a look. If we do these things right, you see this green bubble that appeared. We get a bit of a platform around our community. And what this really does is open up the opportunity, once the village is stabilized now, to connect to the district center and start to bring in larger scale programmatic solutions along economic development and governance lines to include maybe even larger agricultural interventions from the Ministry of Agriculture, USDA and things like that. But this green circle you see represents the stability platform. Once we've stabilized from the bottom up, the community can stand on its own feet. Now we're at a position where we can start to connect to the district center in the build phase. But before we do that, let's take look at a few agricultural interventions and examples of things you can do in the whole bottom up phase that might help you. The first thing I will tell you is what works most in village stability operations along agricultural lines really is the bottom up stuff. It's usually, minimal expense. I'm a little leery of the quick impact thing, and I know what Jim's trying to say there, but just be careful of cash for work and things like that. There's even a system in the Pashtun areas known as Ashar, where young men are mobilized to clean their own karezes, their own waterways, and for years we've been doing cash for work to get them to do the same thing, and in a sense we've built up an entitlement mentality. So just be careful. Try to understand the local systems as you do these things, but I will tell you, bottom-up initiatives that leverage the village elders are really, really important, and they may even be a little bit out of line with the district governor and the ministry reps for a while. That's okay, because you've got to stabilize the community first. Just make sure that you're talking to your folks at the district center. But if you can bring them all in line during the bottom-up piece, that's great. But at a minimum, you want to make sure you have those elders involved. And I'll pause here to see if Paul and the team have any comments. Okay, now talking about the bottom-up approach, this is a picture of Jim Green here, who basically held an agricultural shura. I believe this is up in northern Kandahar. And Jim usually has some great details on this, but I will tell you, one of the things I noticed about Jim and the other guys, when they would hold these agricultural shuras, you would have a real turnout at these things. And agriculture transcends ideology. It transcends, in many ways, insurgencies. Tribalism. It can really bring folks together because it's something that everyone's concerned about. We know that on a lot of these agricultural shuras, we did have Taliban who were in the room, listening and learning and considering other options. And so these agricultural shuras, these interventions, this costs very little, but it is a great way to establish local, individual, and collective resiliencies in an area. And I'll pause to let Paul and the team talk about any other aspects of this type of bottom-up approach. Okay, water management is another big issue in rural Afghanistan, and I'm sure you guys have had classes on this. In fact, I know you have. But I will tell you that water management is something that you really need to strive to understand. Water causes a lot of tribal feuds. It causes a lot of grievances in many of the rural areas that the insurgents are able to exploit, and it just makes life tough for many of your normal rural Afghans. So understanding water management at a fundamental local level is essential. You should know who your local hydrologists are in your regional commands. Try to build relationships with them ahead of time and learn as much as you can about water management while you're there. The other thing, and I'll talk more about this in another slide, but you need to think about water management holistically in the form of a watershed. Leaf, if you haven't had his class already, he'll talk about this. But you've really got to take a full spectrum, holistic look at water management, and you've got to understand how it fits into the big picture. And I'll pause here for the ADAP team to make any further comments. Okay, seed quality is another thing. This is an intervention, again, low cost, something that you can do at a very local level that can really have a big impact. But I will also tell you we've made a lot of mistakes with issuing out seed, giving seed that is then used for nefarious goals and objectives. And so you really need to understand what you're doing on seed quality and with seed initiatives. And before I go any further on that, I'll pause for Paul and the ADAP team to make comments on seed quality and seed initiatives during bottom-up ag interventions. Okay, and then just looking at seedbed preparation, there are examples like we showed earlier of good and bad seedbed preparation here, and you're going to see a range of it everywhere you go. But the key is being able to recognize challenges and opportunities related to seedbeds, and I'll pause for ADAP comment. Now let's talk a little bit about gardens. You're going to see gardens threaded throughout the rural areas of Afghanistan. In fact, it's often surprising to some folks who are there for the first time when they go to these very remote, austere areas at the lush greenery that is present during the summertime. And I tell you, many of these gardens are absolutely beautiful, and they're also very effective at managing pests and facilitating pollination, among other things. These gardens serve a range of purposes, and when done right, they're spectacular. This is a potential opportunity here where you can amplify and broker knowledge where things are done right. Kind of following the model farm concept, but just connecting people and acting as a catalyst to amplify where good gardens are really doing effective work, is making that known to others who can benefit from that knowledge. And you'll find locally appropriate ways to do that. But I would encourage you to learn as much as you can about how gardens are used in the local areas where you're working, and then look for ways to amplify them for larger gain and collective knowledge of brokering. And I'll pause for ADAP comment. Beehives are another, or pollination beehives are another area where you can make some gains. This is a knowledge intervention that's pretty low cost, and if done right, can really make an impact. I've seen this work extremely well. I've also seen people do this who really didn't know what they were doing, and they kind of got into a mess. So with that, I'll pause for ADAP comment on pollination beehives. Orchard establishment and management is another area that you should probably pay really close attention to. Whether you're working in the east or the south, you're going to see orchards playing a very important role in Afghan daily life. And I'll tell you, we have not done a good job over the last decade plus of really understanding the significant role that orchards play in Afghan food production and just daily life. We've done lots of damage to it, and I think in many ways we've just ignored its significance. But I will tell you, just basic tree pruning and simple interventions that Jim often talks about can make a real difference on this kind of thing. Now, here's something I would ask you to consider is when you're making suggestions like this to these folks, remember that they've got a lot to lose here. Food insecurity is already a major problem. And so when you're making suggestions on, ways to do things better, you need to remember that you're toying with their livelihood. This is a make or break situation for them. So you've got to be very, very careful about how you make your suggestions, and understand that if they say no right out of the gate, that maybe you need to scale it back and go a little bit more incremental on your suggestions. But with that in mind, I'll pause for ADAP comment on orchard cuttings and orchard management. Okay, here's just some more on home vegetable gardens, and I'll pause for ADAP comment on that, as well as the low tunnel hoop houses as a possible initiative to use and things to consider about putting it into play. Cool storage and post-harvest. This is something that Hanny is probably going to talk about, or someone else from the ADAP team. I'll tell you, paying close attention to post-harvest stuff is really important. Understanding that as much as you can. You can see here this ancient storage facility on the left. I mean, and then on the right, literally a root cellar built into the side of a hill. I've seen these all over the rural deserts of the South. The bottom line is trying to understand cool storage. Ask questions in the beginning. Get a feel for how it's done. Is it working? And then what possible interventions could you assist with to improve cool storage? And I will tell you, if this is done right, it can really make a difference in how the collective mood of that community and village views what you're doing, how they view their role with the government, and how they view the insurgency. This gets to the heart of food security, and just understanding, taking the time to understand, and doing things that are locally appropriate here could make a very, very big difference. And I'll pause for comment from the ADAP team. Okay, we talked a little bit about water management earlier, and as you see here, these are micro watershed projects. I will tell you, we are really quick when we go into these areas to build dams and dig wells. And I am a bit of a minimalist in this regard. I think it's absolutely essential that before you build anything, you should have a good understanding, a good holistic understanding of the local watershed picture. And if you don't, you probably should refrain from an intervention as it pertains to water, because it can set off tribal wars. It can pull water away from another family. Second and third order effects can be pretty significant. So really take the time to understand the local water picture before you do an intervention. These types of check dams can be very useful, but again, I would reach out to my local hydrologist or engineer before I took on too many large-scale or even small-scale water issues. You really want to know what you're doing on this, and it's possible to do it. It's possible to have local understanding. Just take the time to get it and ask the folks who know. Mulching and fertilizer. This is another area where, basic knowledge, low cost. It's not a foregone conclusion that these folks know how to do this. It can be very, very impactful if you do it right. So this is another opportunity that if you do some homework ahead of time and ask some questions when you get on the ground, you could present an intervention that could help gain traction and legitimacy with your local community. I'll pause for ADAP comment on mulching and fertilizer. Okay, and then, those are, again, some vignettes that should help you through the whole phase. And now we'll go to the build phase. Very quickly, I'll just point out that this is when we're working to connect top to bottom. I'm looking to connect the Afghan local police, which is an irregular force, to what you see there as ANSF under the District Center Triangle, Afghan National Security Forces. In other words, I want to connect the regular forces to the irregular forces. I want to connect top and bottom along security lines. Below that, you see insurgent irrelevance. What we found is when you do things that really make an impact on a local community, where their food security is improved, or where the agricultural interventions allow them to stand up on their own, the insurgent becomes less relevant because he is less able to exploit many of the sources of instability that were once plaguing this village. So the more you can render the insurgent irrelevant along security lines, the better the stability in your area, and agriculture can play a great role in that. The other area where is district development. So now we're going to look for ways to connect along programmatic lines between the district center and the village. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, there are all sorts of programs that USAID, that the Ministry of Rural Rehabilitation and Development, that the Ministry of Agriculture, Irrigation, and Livestock have in place at the district level, like SECA, Security and Stability in Key Areas. These are programs that you can reach up and grab and bring in programmatically to connect to certain villages. You need to know what they are. That's why it's critical that you work with your Regional Civil Military Operations Center, or CMAC, as you see to the left of the build phase there. Work with your DATs and PATs to understand what programs are available and then try to connect them to your village. As you can see here, tractor, heavy equipment things, implements. There are tractors in Afghanistan, and there are programs where you can go in and actually do interventions that are fairly large scale or more impactful than the normal bottom-up stuff that can affect this kind of thing. And I'll pause for ADAP comment. Okay, you see here, again, getting back to the water piece, water loss during normal irrigation can be a major problem. And some of the solutions exceed the scope and scale of what you're able to do from a bottom-up perspective. So the build phase is an opportunity where, as you see on the right side here, materials were provided. They provide the labor, they provide the collective willingness to do it, and you bring that together. You connect top and bottom. And this, frankly, is very much in keeping with the way rural Pashtuns have handled development in the past. They would do as much as they could, and then they would solicit the formal government structure for anything that exceeded their scope and capacity. A book known as Jirgas, The Pashtun Way of Participatory Governance by Khan Idris, is a great little book to show how this works. But again, these are the types of projects, when you connect top and bottom, that can make a major impact. And here it is. You see the district governor and some other ministry representatives coming out to a rural area and really getting a feel for what's going on at the village level and working to connect. This can be very impactful. Connecting the dots between bottom up and top down has always been challenging in Afghanistan, as I told you earlier. And the more you can serve as a catalyst to bring these two worlds together around agriculture, the better. You just need to make sure that both bottom and top are ready for it, and that you don't have unrealistic expectations and you end up losing credibility. You'll know when the time is right. So there we are. Now we're in transition phase. And transition phase is really tough because in many times we're trying to transition areas because they are secure, but they're not necessarily stable. This is a major problem, as many of the ADTs are seeing right now. You have temporary security through Afghan local police or the presence of Afghan national security forces, but the sources of instability tied to conflict resolution, food insecurity, and other things are still plaguing these local areas. And unless those are resolved, it's likely that the insurgents and the Islamists will continue to pull the threads on these sources of instability. So just because you're in transition, don't think that agriculture no longer plays a role. It does. It plays a critical role. And the more we can look at how agriculture, how we can empower Afghans to create enduring long-term agricultural stability at a local level, that's when you really start getting into the meat of transition. And it's got to be an integral part of what we're doing. In fact, this assessment that I'm going on next week, which is preventing me from being with you guys, that's one of the major recommendations that I'm going to make to the Special Operations leadership, is continuing to keep agriculture front and center in our long-term foreign and internal defense strategy for the next few decades is absolutely essential for rendering the insurgent irrelevant and for stabilizing Afghanistan for the long haul. And, you know, again, as Jim would tell you, don't drop the ball in transition. You need to stay focused, keep looking for ways to be a catalyst who connects those dots, and you've got to talk from bottom to top and top to bottom. Don't just say those guys up there don't understand, or those guys down at the local level are just doing their own thing. Talk to each other. Find ways to communicate. Use your Regional Civil Military Operations Center, or CMOC. Use your DATs. Use your PATs, your Security Force Advisors, whoever you have to work through. And don't forget to empower those ministries, the Ministry of Agriculture, Irrigation, and Livestock, or known as DALE, your MRRD. Find those local resilient actors at the informal level and connect them to those ministry reps. You've got to be a catalyst for that. And continue to follow up, and follow up. Don't ever assume that something is on autopilot. Even in transition, Overwatch, hub and spoke is absolutely essential. So that pretty much covers the presentation. Here are some online resources for you. I will tell you that the Stability Institute is the knowledge forum that I'm the director of. There's the website. It's free. Go to the new member section. After you get there, fill out the little membership form. It'll come right to me. I'll approve you in short order, and you'll find a wealth of resources on this Institute website that include security, a page for security, a page for economic development with lots of stuff on ag, and something on governance. The Tribal Analysis Center, under that, if you're going to an area that's tribal, I would highly recommend you Google Tribal Analysis Center, go to their e-library section, and there's all kinds of stuff there on tribalism. If you want to understand more about informal leadership or Jirgas, go to WADAN. They're a nonprofit out of Kabul, and they have an entire national Shura, National Jirga Council that can answer your questions. The Liaison Office, also out of Kabul, is a nonprofit tribal organization that can provide you with lots of provincial studies. And then finally, when it comes to strategic messaging and information operations in rural stability, I recommend you take a look at this article I wrote on just how to get your narrative out there and how to amplify the good deeds of local farmers and other folks who are resilient and standing up for their communities. Okay, now, here, I'm going to build this out. These are some of your in-country resources. I've already talked about the CMOCs, the PATs, and the DATs. They're fantastic. Don't forget about the civilians at your regional platform, both in the East and the South. This is USAID, Department of State. They may have moved into regional consulates by the time you get there, but they're still folks you should know. I've already talked about the WADAN and TLO, non-governmental organizations. Another good non-governmental organization is Global Partnership for Afghanistan and Roots of Peace. Both fantastic organizations. I think Roots of Peace may have talked to you guys this week. Spirit of America is another one, a nonprofit, a U.S.-based nonprofit that does a lot of good things at the rural level. And then FAF Development They are a for-profit, but I would definitely recommend checking out their website and reaching out to them. The Afghan National Youth Social Organization is another Kabul-based NGO that has provincial youth of elders represented from every province. Their director is a guy named Arash Barak. I can connect you with him, and they are excellent at gaining point of entry into tough rural areas. And then don't forget about your AFPAC hands. These are U.S. military officers and NCOs working at the ministry level at both MRRD, which is the Ministry for Rural Rehabilitation and Development, and the Ministry of Agriculture, Irrigation, and Livestock. These are U.S. representatives who are working at these ministries that are directly related to the ag mission that you're doing. This allows you to connect top to bottom on our own side. And then the big red Ask the Institute button there, that is the red button on the Stability Institute website. If you have any questions when you get over there, please click that button, fill out the little request for information button. It comes right to me, and within 24 to 48 hours, we will push an answer to you that answers your question and connects you to folks. Just recently, we had a cultural support team member working in the Shinwar district who had questions about post-harvest canning, and we connected her to Paul and Hanny and some other folks, and they were able to help her with some very locally appropriate solutions to canning and prevent her from making some mistakes on canning that they might have made. I'll pause here for Paul to make a comment on that and how they can help with the reach back. One other thing that I don't have on here is the reach back to the ADAPT website and everything that they offer you. I would strongly recommend you keep that in your speed dial as well. Okay, that wraps up this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful for you. We'll keep it posted on the Stability Institute website if you ever want to come back and watch it. And hopefully I'll be able to come online with you guys in Skype and answer any questions that you might have. Thanks for your time. I wish you guys the best of luck over there, and Godspeed.
Hey guys, how you doing, Paul? Good to see everybody. This is just as weird for me as it is for you. So I'm assuming you guys have already gone through the presentation, and Paul, you've added your points to it?
Yes.
Okay. Well, hey, look, guys, I appreciate the opportunity to dial in for a few minutes, and Paul and Bill asked me to just sit in with you briefly to see if you had any questions or any discussion. One thing I will kind of finish up with and see if this prompts any comments or questions. I'm going over on, I guess about a week from yesterday to Afghanistan, and I'm going to be we're doing a 4-person assessment team to just travel around the country for about a month and a half and look at where we stand kind of on the whole rural stability picture. We're going to look at VSO, we're going to look at AOP and the whole range of things there that SOF are doing in country as General Miller takes over the National Special Operations Command, the studies for him. And then we're going to go back and kind of render status to him in about a month and a half on what we've seen as far as where we stand now and where we think this thing is trending. And you know, I don't know exactly what we're going to find, but a couple things that I will share with you that I believe are going to affect you on your watch, and you can take this for what it's worth. Having seen this program from start to finish and been over there a couple times. Number one is I think that the rural areas are going to continue to matter no matter what our policy says. You know, we can go to Overwatch, we can go to transition, we can go to just about any type, we can leave. But the rural areas are always going to matter. You're talking about a country where 70 to 80% of the population still lives in small villages and communities that, frankly, is beyond the reach of the central government. That's every major study you look at promotes those demographics. So and here's the second part to that, and I think I said this in the presentation. With the exception of the communist uprising in the 70s, every single rebellion and social mobilization in that country has come from the rural areas that I just talked about, and almost all of them from the Pashtun rural areas. And that's no different today. So when you go over there, whether you're doing transition or Overwatch or whatever, I would encourage you to pay attention to those rural areas and to agriculture, because it's not going away. In fact, it will get harder to look at those rural areas where the insurgents are setting up shop. That's number one. Number two is I would encourage you in your pre-mission training as you get ready to go, whether you're going solo as an augmentee, whether you're going as a Cat A, whether you're going as a Cat A that's been 4 times or your first time. Look, we've really sucked at looking at history and local reality in Afghanistan for the past decade plus. We have not paid attention as much as we could to what relative stability has looked like in that country historically and what works and what doesn't. So to the degree that you can look at history, specifically the 1920s to the 1970s, called the Mujahideen period, and what stability looked like in the rural areas then. Barfield is a good book on that. Seth Jones' Graveyard of Empires. And then a book called Jirgas, which addresses the informal governance aspects of Pashtun society by a guy named Khan Idris, Khanidris. Those are 3 really good books that look at that. But I would really pay attention to Afghan history and to informal civil society, because the day-to-day life of Afghanistan, that's how it's governed. It really is. And then the third comment I would make to you is I would really look for ways to work from the bottom up any way you can. Even though, you hear VSO is not in play anymore and ALP is going to the regional, provincial level, whatever. The bottom-up approach in Afghanistan is what it is. And if you don't work the rural areas from the bottom up, your ass is going to be sitting in the district center behind the HESCO, rolling out on 15-page CONOPS. Bottom up is about the only way to really achieve any kind of influence in those areas. Getting as close as you can to the population, understanding their sources of instability. And I see a lot of civil affairs in the room. You guys are very good at that. But understanding those sources of instability and finding ways to address them through agriculture. That's why I'm such a big fan of ADAPT, because I frankly believe they have more practical ways to address agriculture and those sources of instability than any outfit out there. So to the degree that you can, think about how you're going to apply agriculture as a point of entry and as a consistent bottom-up application during your time there. It will not go out of vogue while you're there. I can assure you it will continue to be relevant, and for the degree that I can, I'm going to make that case to General Miller at SOGITF when I can, that we need to continue postured for doing long-term ag. Okay, I've run my stuff long enough. Those were 3 points I just wanted to make to you that I didn't want to forget. So I'll pause to see if any of you guys have any questions or comments about anything that's been covered or anything that you'd like to load me up with as I go on this survey. So standing by.
That's the first question for Scott. I know he's a very thorough presenter, but give us a second, Scott, to digest your words of wisdom, many words of wisdom. But this is your chance to talk with the fellow that knows the VSO, probably one of the best guys that knows it, I should say.
You don't have the token preloaded question in the audience, Paul?
This group's very capable. They're deep thinkers, so I'm sure someone will have a thought for you.
If not, that's all right.
Pardon me?
We were just at academic week, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll talk to Zero.
Okay. You just came off of academic week?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So.
Oh my God! You guys had to sit through that twice? Oh man, I am so sorry. Well, I at least tried to modify it a little bit. I was afraid that might happen to 1 or 2 of you, but okay. Hey, one other thing that I'll make a comment on, Paul, is the Stability Institute. If you guys get on there, if you're already a member, great. If you're not, I recommend you go to it, www.stabilityinstitute.com, and go to the new members tab, fill it out. The Ask the Institute button is a pretty good way to reach back and connect to other members of the network. We're up to about 750 now, mostly operators, CSTs, civil affairs, I mean, you name it. And a lot of hydrologists. Paul and the crew are on there. Just recently we had a CST from Shinwar District reach back on some post-harvest questions that she was looking at. So, again, just a way, even in theater, if you don't have a lot of time for the request for information process, send it to me. I don't have much of a life or hobby, so I'll take it, and within 24 to 48 hours, I'll get you something back and connect you to somebody that can help you. And you can move on and do other things. So use that button, if nothing else, as you think of things, to connect to the larger network.
Great. Any thoughts, anyone? I guess Scott's always available. Whenever I seem to write him an email, he fires one back right away. So his word is really true. He's completely dedicated to this, and as I say, he'll get back to you right away. Scott, we really want to thank you so much. Do you have a final word you'd like to say, or?
No, that's it. Good luck, guys. Appreciate what you're doing out there. I know it's tough times to go over there during transition, a lot of ambiguity. But I honestly believe long-term fit is where it's at anyway. If you look at every other place where we've been successful doing this stuff, it's been a long-term fit application, and the agriculture piece will be part of that. So, and you got the ink. Not only is the ink not dry on the fit plan, I don't even think it's been written yet. I really don't. I think there's still a lot to be shaped and developed, and hopefully you guys will play a part in that. So good luck, Godspeed, stay safe, and we'll see you around.
Great, Scott. Thanks again for taking the time to do this for us. Thanks very much.
You bet.